Hey, my name is Laura Stellner, employee at Carbon Mines, and in this video I'm going to talk about the development of a regionalized chemicals and plastics LCI database for robust environmental decision support. To mitigate climate change, many industry sectors are committed to reduce their emissions. Now, one thing companies can do is reducing their direct emissions from their own operations. However, these direct emissions are usually only the tip of the iceberg. Typically, the submerged hidden part of the iceberg has a much bigger impact on the total emissions, and this part corresponds to the supply chain emissions. But the quantification of these supply chain emissions poses a big challenge due to lack of data. Gathering this data is especially challenging for industries with highly complex and globalized production chains. Therefore, one particular sector that faces such data gaps is the chemical industry. As an example, to analyze the real impact of supply chain emissions in the chemical industry, I want to show the company carbon footprint of BASF, a major chemical company in Germany. The bar chart shows the real share of BASF's carbon footprint from the year 2020. So now, if we look at those numbers, we see that the direct emissions indeed have a small impact of only 16%. The remaining part of the company carbon footprint is caused by indirect emissions. In particular, we can see that by far the largest part of the company carbon footprint is caused by the supply of raw materials, which has a share of 46%, so almost half of the total carbon footprint. So we can conclude that the supply of raw materials is crucial for chemical carbon footprints. And in order to close this gap in supply chain data, I want to show you two things today. First, I will present our modeling approach to develop a regionalized lifecycle database for chemicals. Second, I want to show some results of our model and explain how these data can influence environmental decision-making. But first, when building a lifecycle inventory database, we need a very good understanding of the structure of the chemical industry, and that's what I want to show you in the following. First, we need to understand that for each chemical, there are typically several production locations all over the world. This is represented on the map by the little dots. Each production location has a respective annual production volume. Secondly, chemicals are typically produced using different production technologies, so we need to understand what is the exact production technology in which production location. Thus, we need detailed technical models of each technology in order to determine the inputs, outputs, and emissions in every single chemical plant. Furthermore, we need to understand how chemicals are traded globally. International trade interconnects different production regions so that the supply chain of chemicals in different regions depend on each other. For example, the consumption mix of a chemical in Germany can in some cases fully consist of imported mixes from other countries. So, in summary, connecting the market data, the technical data, and the trade data enables chemicals to be tracked throughout the whole global economy. And this is exactly what we did in our modeling approach. In the following, I'm going to explain in more detail our modeling approach and the assumptions to develop an LCI database for chemicals. In contrast to most LCI databases, our model does not start at a country level with technologies per country, but it starts at a chemical plant level, so we actually model the real plants that are operating at different locations in the world. So what we first do is that for each chemical we collect information about the production location, production volume, and the production technology that is used in the plant. We link this information to detailed technical models for each production technology. In the next step, we group these plants into integrated production sites based on their location. We assume that site-specific production technology mixes are used to satisfy the demand for raw materials within integrated production sites. In other words, we calculate internal production mixes and internal consumption mixes that supply the plants with intermediates. In case intermediates within a site cannot be supplied internally, the consumption mix is calculated from a national consumption mix. In the next step, after modeling the integrated production sites, we calculate the average national production and consumption mixes. The production mix in a given country is based on a production volume weighted average of all production plants in that country. Because the production mix of a chemical usually does not reflect the consumption of a chemical in that country, We then calculate the consumption mix. The consumption mix takes into account the regional production and international trade. So, the consumption mix is represented by the sum of a country's production minus exported chemicals plus imported chemicals. And this is the advantage of our modeling approach. Due to the plant-level modeling, we can not only calculate country-specific mixes, but we can also calculate supplier-specific technology mixes. These supplier-specific data are of particular interest as chemical companies usually buy their raw materials from specific chemical suppliers. In our database, a supplier-specific mix is based on a production volume weighted average of all production plants operated by the respective supplier. Now, after explaining our modeling approach, I will discuss some results of our model and explain how these LCI data can be used to support environmental decision-making. This map shows the climate impact of the consumption mixes of polypropylene in different countries. Here, dark colors indicate a high climate impact and light colors indicate a low climate impact. At this point, I would like to emphasize that we have developed an LCA database, which means that in addition to the climate impact, the database also covers many other LCA methods and indicators. We can see on the map that we have large differences in climate impacts of polypropylene, which vary by a factor of 4 between countries. These differences can be due to differences in feedstock use, technologies, energy supply, and trade effects. If we now go from the consumption mixes to the production mixes, we see that actually less than a third of the countries produce propylene themselves, and the other countries cover their supply through trade. Here we can also see that China has by far the largest climate impact, which is a factor of 4 larger than the smallest climate impact. So when we now want to understand the influence of these large differences on environmental decision support, we first look at the supplier-specific climate impacts of polypropylene production. In China, the supplier's carbon footprint of polypropylene varies in a huge range among the different suppliers, ranging from around 1.2 to 10.6 kilogram CO2 equivalents per kilogram polypropylene. Worldwide, the supplier-specific climate impacts of polypropylene reveal a very similar trend, ranging from 0.9 to 10.6 kilogram CO2 equivalents. Thus, for polypropylene, a potential switch from the highest emitting supplier to the lowest emitting supplier would result in a climate impact reduction of 91%. On average, the climate impact for polypropylene production is 2.2 kilogram CO2 equivalents per kilogram polypropylene. Therefore, when switching from the average to the lowest emitting supplier, an average climate impact reduction of 56% can be achieved for polypropylene. However, there is still the question what exactly is causing the different impacts among the countries and suppliers. To analyze this, we go one step back in the supply chain and look at the production technologies of propylene, which is used to produce polypropylene. The bars show the climate impacts in kilogram CO2 equivalents per kilogram polypropylene, depending on different major propylene production technologies for the United States in green and China in blue. The bars show similar climate impacts in both countries for the technologies fluid catalytic cracking, steam cracking of naphtha, ethane and atmospheric gas oil, dehydrogenation of propane, and metathesis of C4. These technologies have a rather small climate impact and are used by low-emitting suppliers, which is why these suppliers have a low climate impact for polypropylene production. In contrast, when looking at the high-emitting suppliers, we see that they mostly use methanol-based propylene for polypropylene production. In addition, we see that all of these suppliers are located in China, where typically a high-emitting coal-based methanol production process is applied. So this explains the high climate impacts of polypropylene in China and also the large differences among suppliers. So in summary, our plant-specific modeling of the chemical industry enables a more detailed representation of reality and thus reveals a large potential for reducing chemical supply chain emissions by switching suppliers. And this analysis can not only be done for polypropylene, but for all 89 large volume chemicals and more than 3,000 companies that are included in our model. This slide shows the average climate impact reduction potential in percent for all 89 chemicals. The chemicals are plotted on the x-axis. We see that the reduction potential varies widely depending on the chemical. In the following, I'm going to pick out a few chemicals. So first, as discussed before, polypropylene reaches an average climate impact reduction potential of 56%. In contrast to that, methanol reaches an even higher reduction potential of 75% due to the strongly different production technologies, which are mainly based on coal gasification and steam methane reforming. In contrast, I also want to show the results for some refinery products and intermediates. Those are at the very beginning of the chemical supply chain. Therefore, as there are few differences in production technologies along the supply chain of those materials, the climate impact reduction potential is less than 20%. So in total, when calculating the average climate impact reduction potential over all 89 large volume chemicals, we show that the choice of suppliers can reduce 38% of the climate impacts on average. And with these promising results, I would like to conclude my presentation. So first, we saw, based on real data, that the supply of raw materials is crucial for chemical carbon footprints. Moreover, I showed our plant-level modeling approach to develop an LCI database for chemicals. Finally, the results showed large differences in supplier-specific chemical carbon footprints, which we have identified as the result of different technologies, feedstock, and energy use. Moreover, the results revealed a large climate impact reduction potential by switching suppliers. This knowledge can be used for environmental decision-making. Thank you very much for watching this video presentation. I'm looking forward to your comments and questions. Also, feel free to send me an email or contact me via LinkedIn or our website. Thank you.